It all started in the quiet halls of the Fulton County Courthouse, a place that, until recently, had become the epicenter of a storm. Fani Willis, the district attorney of Fulton County, had just begun her investigation into former President Donald Trump's alleged attempts to influence the 2020 election results in Georgia. The world watched as the case unfolded, with daily headlines and media blitzes echoing her every move. Her reputation had grown. She was praised for her tenacity and fearlessness in taking on such a high-profile case. But no one could have predicted the twist that would leave everyone stunned. Fani Willis was just finishing up a meeting with her team in her office when she received a message from an anonymous tipster. The subject of the email was cryptic, shocking information that could change everything. "You need to know this. Now." Her pulse quickened as she opened the message. What she saw was a bombshell. A previously undisclosed recording surfaced, allegedly from a conversation between Trump and a key figure in the investigation. The recording was not a casual chat, it contained direct threats and promises of political payback. The kind of conversation no one was supposed to hear. Fani leaned forward, eyes wide, as she listened to the tape. The tone was unmistakable, a veiled threat against her career. The implications were chilling. If verified, this could completely alter the trajectory of the case. As Fani sat back in her chair, processing the weight of what she had just heard, she knew one thing for sure: her life was about to change forever. But was the tape real? And if it was, would it be enough to take down a former president? The hours following Fani Willis's discovery felt like an eternity. She couldn't shake the voice on that recording from her mind, its chilling tone echoing through her thoughts. The weight of what she was holding, the potential to completely dismantle one of the most powerful figures in American history, was almost too much to bear. But she had a job to do, and she couldn't let fear cloud her judgment. She immediately convened her team, each of them shocked by the news. They huddled in a conference room, the air thick with tension. Fani was firm in her resolve: they had to verify the authenticity of the tape before they could move forward. The challenge was immense. In an age where deep fakes and altered recordings were all too common, they couldn't risk presenting something that could be easily discredited. They contacted top forensic audio experts to analyze the tape, their reputations on the line with every test. Every detail needed to be scrutinized. Was the voice truly Trump's? Was the conversation manipulated? As the investigation intensified, a troubling development emerged. Someone was trying to block the experts from accessing critical resources. Mysterious figures had appeared in the background, applying pressure on the tech companies that held key information. The closer they got to the truth, the more people seemed determined to keep it buried. Fani felt a shiver down her spine. This was no longer just about law, it was about power and influence at a level she had never imagined. And it was becoming clear that powerful forces were trying to stop her. But Fani refused to back down. She knew the stakes were too high. The recording, if real, could be the key to not only bringing down Trump but also exposing a network of corruption that stretched far beyond Georgia's borders. The tension reached its breaking point when an unexpected call came through to Fani's office late one evening. It was from one of the forensic experts. "I think you need to hear this," the voice on the other end said, sounding gravely serious. The call from the forensic expert came just as Fani was about to leave the office for the night. She hesitated for a moment, then picked up the phone, bracing herself for what she might hear. The voice on the other end was tight, controlled. "Fani, I've got news. The tape, it's real. I don't know how, but it's authentic." Fani's breath caught in her throat. "Are you sure? How can we be certain? There are so many ways to fabricate evidence these days." "I understand your skepticism," the expert replied, his voice low, "but we've run every possible test. We've cross-referenced the voice with other recordings of Trump, public speeches, interviews, you name it. And we've isolated the metadata. Everything matches." Fani felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. The moment she'd been waiting for had arrived, but it was also the moment she feared. Now that the truth was in her hands, there was no turning back. The stakes were higher than ever, and the enemies she had made along the way were already moving to strike. The expert continued, "There's more, though. There's a part of the recording that we almost missed. It's a name, one you might want to look into." Fani's heart raced. She quickly grabbed a notepad, her pen poised. "The name is Samuel Brown," the expert said. "He's mentioned in passing, but it's clear from the context that he's a key player in this entire operation. I've found connections to several shell companies and high-ranking political figures. But it's not just business, it's personal." Fani's mind was spinning. Samuel Brown. She had never heard of him. But this was a lead, a significant one. Whoever he was connected to something much larger than she had realized. The call ended abruptly, and Fani sat alone in the dim light of her office, staring at the name scrawled on her notepad. Was Brown the key to unraveling the whole conspiracy? Or was he merely a pawn in a much darker game? Either way, Fani knew that finding him could be the breakthrough she so desperately needed. But as she prepared to delve deeper into the mystery, she had no idea how far the shadows reached. Fani's investigation had just crossed a point of no return. The name Samuel Brown had taken over Fani's thoughts. Everything she had been working toward, the investigation, the pressure, the dangers, suddenly seemed to hinge on finding out who this man really was. The connection to the tape was undeniable. Brown's name had been dropped casually in a conversation that contained veiled threats, a conversation that had the power to unravel everything. Fani knew she couldn't afford to waste time. She needed answers, and she needed them fast. Brown's name didn't come up in any of the initial records she or her team could find, so they turned to unconventional methods, scraping through obscure databases, digging into his connections. It wasn't long before they discovered Brown's shadowy past. He wasn't a public figure, in fact, very few knew anything about him. But Fani's investigators dug deeper, revealing a tangled web of connections. Samuel Brown had ties to political figures, yes, but there were more alarming links. He was also tied to organized financial networks that had funneled money through offshore accounts to obscure entities, many of which were allegedly involved in influencing elections across the U.S. But what really stopped Fani in her tracks was the discovery of an old, sealed court document from a case that was mysteriously dismissed. The case was linked to a series of illegal campaign contributions that had mysteriously gone missing after being sent to multiple PACs tied to influential political figures. Samuel Brown was at the center of it. The deeper Fani's team dug, the more they realized that Brown wasn't just a player in the background, he was the orchestrator. He had used his connections to cover his tracks, and now, it appeared he was pulling the strings in a much larger operation than anyone had imagined. What had started as an investigation into Trump's actions in Georgia was beginning to feel like a small piece of a massive puzzle. Fani couldn't help but feel the gravity of it all. She was up against a network that stretched far beyond the borders of Georgia, involving some of the most powerful figures in the country. This wasn't just a case anymore, it was a political war. And then came the warning. Fani was standing in her office, reviewing the documents on Brown, when she received a call. It was a private line, one she didn't recognize. "Fani Willis, right?" the voice on the other end said, smooth and cold. "Yes, who is this?" she asked, her heart racing. "You don't want to mess with Samuel Brown. He's untouchable. You have no idea what you're up against. Walk away while you still can." The line went dead. Fani sat there for a moment, the weight of the threat sinking in. It was clear, someone didn't want her to continue. But she wasn't about to back down now. She had seen too much to turn back. The chilling call had left Fani rattled, but it also steeled her resolve. Whoever Samuel Brown was, whatever power he held, she was not going to be intimidated. She had come too far, and there was too much at stake. The idea of backing down, of letting this man, whoever he was, control her investigation, was unimaginable. But Fani knew she had to be smart. Whoever was behind these threats had resources. They had the ability to track her, to manipulate people in positions of power. So, she gathered her closest allies, her team of investigators, legal experts, and trusted advisors, and told them what she had learned. The weight of the information they were holding wasn't just dangerous for her, it was dangerous for them too. "Be cautious," Fani said, her voice firm. "We're up against something bigger than we thought. If we move forward, we need to take precautions. No one can know the full extent of what we're dealing with." The next few days were a blur of covert operations. Fani made sure her team used secure communication channels. She reviewed every step of the investigation, making sure everything was airtight. She contacted federal agencies for protection, though she knew this was no ordinary criminal case. Whoever was behind Brown had influence that reached into all corners of the political world. Meanwhile, Brown's power only seemed to grow. New reports surfaced, hinting that he had been using his extensive network to pressure politicians, judges, and law enforcement officers. There were whispers of blackmail, bribery, and even threats of violence. Fani couldn't let that deter her. She was too far in, and the people of Georgia were counting on her. She had to see this through, no matter the cost. Then, one afternoon, things took a turn that left her speechless. A trusted whistleblower from one of the shell companies connected to Brown came forward. They had been working with Brown for years, but had grown disillusioned with the operation. This whistleblower, whose identity remained anonymous, claimed to have access to crucial documents, files that could directly link Samuel Brown to multiple election manipulation schemes, not just in Georgia, but across the country. The whistleblower requested an urgent meeting. They wanted a safe place to talk, away from prying eyes. It was clear that they were in grave danger. Fani made the decision to meet them in a remote location, far from any surveillance. She didn't trust anyone else at this point. It would be just her, the whistleblower, and the evidence. When she arrived at the agreed location, her heart skipped a beat. The place was abandoned, and the tension in the air was palpable. The whistleblower was already there, waiting. "What do you have for me?" Fani asked, trying to steady her voice. The whistleblower handed over a folder, thick with documents. As Fani flipped through the pages, her eyes widened. These weren't just financial records. These were communications, emails, and transactions that outlined the full scope of Brown's operation, his manipulation of elections, his involvement in bribery, and even his connections to foreign governments. But then, in the middle of the folder, Fani found something that made her blood run cold. A letter. It was addressed to none other than her. "I've been following you, Fani," it read. "You've done well so far, but don't get any ideas. This is your last warning. Walk away, or the consequences will be dire." The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Samuel Brown's. Fani knew now, without a doubt, that this wasn't just an investigation. This was war. Fani Willis sat in her car, the weight of the letter pressing heavily on her chest. The document was like a final nail in the coffin, a stark reminder that she was no longer just an attorney handling a case, she was at the center of a dangerous conspiracy. Samuel Brown had crossed a line by personally threatening her, and she knew it was only a matter of time before things escalated further. The whistleblower, still sitting across from her in the dimly lit parking lot, watched her carefully, sensing the shift in her demeanor. "Are you all right?" they asked softly. Fani didn't answer immediately. Her mind was racing, sifting through everything she knew about Brown, the investigation, the people involved. This letter, it wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration of war. He knew she was getting too close. And the closer she got, the more dangerous the game would become. "I can't stop now," Fani said finally, her voice steady but cold. "This has to come to light. There's too much at stake." The whistleblower nodded solemnly. "Then you need to be careful. I don't think Brown will let you walk away from this, alive or otherwise." Fani closed the folder and handed it back to them. "What about the people in the shell companies?" she asked. "Can we bring them in?" "They'll disappear if they know you're onto them," the whistleblower warned. "Most of them are in on it. Brown's too powerful. He has connections that reach further than you can imagine. You need to move fast, and you need to have a strategy." Fani felt the truth of their words sink in. She was in a race against time now, not only to expose Brown but to protect herself and her team. If Brown felt cornered, he would strike first. And the people she trusted the most were now at risk. The first thing Fani did was pull together a covert meeting with key members of her team. She couldn't afford any more leaks, and she couldn't trust anyone beyond the circle of absolute necessity. They needed to strategize, and they needed to act quickly. It was clear that the more evidence they gathered, the more Brown would lash out to silence them. Her team had two primary objectives: build a solid case that could not be easily dismissed and prepare for the inevitable fallout when Brown made his move. Fani's next step was to reach out to federal agencies, but even that came with its risks. Could she trust them? Or was Brown's reach deep enough to corrupt even the highest echelons of the government? As Fani began coordinating her team's next moves, she was interrupted by an unexpected visitor, a journalist, an investigative reporter who had been following the case from the sidelines. He'd heard rumors about Brown and was looking for the story of a lifetime. "What do you know about Samuel Brown?" Fani asked, her voice low. The reporter hesitated, clearly aware of the stakes. "More than I probably should. I've seen the ties to international money laundering, his political connections. But I couldn't prove it, until now." He slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside were photographs, images of Brown meeting with foreign agents, photos of illicit transactions, and damning evidence that tied him directly to the 2020 election manipulations. It was the proof Fani had been searching for, but it came with a dangerous cost. The reporter's life was at risk, and now, so was hers. "You need to go public with this," the reporter urged. "The world needs to know." Fani considered his words carefully. She knew what revealing this evidence would mean: it would draw even more attention to her, to the case, to Brown's vast network. But it was a gamble that could change everything. "If I release this," she said, "Brown will do everything in his power to make sure I don't survive to see the consequences." The reporter's eyes darkened. "Then we make sure he's exposed before that happens." And just like that, Fani's investigation crossed the threshold into something much more dangerous than she had anticipated. The next few days felt like a blur of strategy, secrecy, and escalating danger. Fani knew the walls were closing in around her, but there was no turning back. The evidence had been collected, the pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, and Brown was beginning to realize that his empire was unraveling. It was only a matter of time before he made his move. But Fani was ready. She had already prepared for the worst. Her team, now operating under high security protocols, worked tirelessly to verify and compile all of the evidence. The journalist who had brought the final pieces of the puzzle to light had gone into hiding, aware that Brown's network would stop at nothing to silence him. Fani knew that the moment she went public with the evidence, there would be no going back. She couldn't afford to hesitate. The world had to know what Brown had done, and if he thought he could intimidate her into silence, he was gravely mistaken. She reached out to her trusted contacts within the media, carefully selecting only the most reliable journalists who could handle the gravity of the situation. At the same time, she filed a motion to release the evidence to the courts, ensuring that the case would be brought to the highest level possible. The media was already buzzing with rumors of corruption and election manipulation, but nothing could prepare the public for the storm that was about to hit. As the story broke, the fallout was immediate and explosive. Brown's connections were revealed for all to see, his ties to foreign governments, his money laundering schemes, and the extent of his influence over key political figures. The story was everywhere, dominating every news outlet across the country. But Brown didn't go quietly. Within hours of the news breaking, Fani received the kind of call she had been dreading. It was from her team, who had intercepted an encrypted message. It was a direct threat. Brown's men were coming for her. "We need to get you to safety," her lead investigator insisted. "This has gone too far. You're in danger." Fani's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the noose tightening around her, but there was no going back. This wasn't just about her anymore, it was about exposing the corruption that had poisoned the system. It was about standing up to the dark forces that sought to control the country from the shadows. "I'm not leaving," Fani said firmly. "This is bigger than me. This is about justice." But as she hung up the phone, a sudden realization hit her. She could feel the eyes of her enemies closing in. It wasn't just the political power or the money they had that made them dangerous, it was their ability to manipulate the system, to corrupt every level of authority. And now, it was personal. They had targeted her, and she was going to fight until the very end. The next 48 hours would become a blur of uncertainty and adrenaline. Fani's team worked around the clock to protect her, taking every precaution to ensure that she wouldn't be vulnerable. The threats grew more intense, but so did her resolve. The final showdown was approaching, and it would come down to a battle for survival. And then, in a moment that would change the course of history, the unthinkable happened. Federal authorities, finally acting on the overwhelming evidence presented by Fani and the whistleblower, launched a massive investigation into Samuel Brown's entire operation. As law enforcement closed in on his network, Brown was arrested in a dramatic, high-profile takedown that shocked the world. His empire crumbled within days. The public outcry was deafening. Investigations were launched into the corrupt politicians, businessmen, and officials who had been complicit in Brown's schemes. The case became a symbol of the fight against corruption at the highest levels, and Fani Willis was hailed as a hero, a beacon of justice in a time when it was desperately needed. But even with Brown's arrest, Fani knew the war wasn't over. The battle had been won, but the fight for true accountability would take years. Yet in that moment, Fani felt a surge of triumph, knowing that despite the threats, the danger, and the endless obstacles, she had brought down one of the most dangerous men in the country. And she had survived. The case of Samuel Brown would go down in history as one of the most shocking political scandals ever uncovered. But for Fani, it was not just a victory, it was a reminder of the power of truth, and the price one had to pay to seek it. The story of Samuel Brown and his empire may have ended, but Fani's journey, one that had begun with a single investigation, was only just beginning. The final reckoning had come, and the world would never be the same.